We begin by acknowledging that we gather today on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples, who since time immemorial have hunted, fished, gathered, and taken care of these lands. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and we honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. By acknowledging these homelands, we are also committing to working with tribal nations to further the aims we share in common to protect and enrich our environment and to bring greater social justice to all. Welcome.
I'd like to introduce our speakers for tonight. Kate Lunsford is president of the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County, our current president. And Carol McMahon, that you just heard giving the land acknowledgement, is a member of our Natural Resources team. And I am Joan Smith. I chair the Natural Resources team for the Committee of the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County. What I would like to talk to you a little bit about is how we got to where we are and with our focus on tree canopy. And before that began, you'll notice our title is Becoming an Evergreen Community. And that comes from our inspiration that came to us from the Evergreen Community Act that was put in place by the Department of Natural Resources, the Division of Urban Forestry, that passed originally in 2008, but was not really funded until this legislative session. So 2021, they actually put money behind this. It's a voluntary program for jurisdictions throughout the state to join in becoming an evergreen community, and it has certain parameters and so forth. We have actually within our county various cities who have embraced that. The city of Edmonds, Mount Lake Terrace, and Lake Forest Park have taken part in trying to become an evergreen community. However, there's a lot of us that live in unincorporated county where there's a great deal going on. So Kate, if you can now move us ahead. So the reasons why are basically twofold. Why an evergreen community? It started with our concern over the climate change emergency. In 2019, the League of Women Voters US of the United States declared that climate change had become an emergency. Our league has been looking at climate change and its importance and its impacts since as early as 2007 when we held a forum on the topic. But you'll remember that was the time of Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. And a lot of people were trying to become convinced that there was even an impact with climate change. And as a consequence, we were spending a lot of time on this, trying to get the public to believe that this was actually going on. So, but now we're facing that with this heat wave that we're going on. We're really feeling the impacts of climate change, and people are much more cognizant that it is real. The other real problem that we were addressing, and many of us within our neighborhoods, we're seeing all the development pressures that were going on and the clear cutting of the trees on the steep slopes. Here are a couple of them above Puget Sound, which shows how they just literally took every tree, and some of these were second growth forests, but they were huge. They hadn't been cut for over 100 years and were of good quality timber. And as a consequence, all that runoff now is going directly into Puget Sound. So it's been something. This is just one example of one neighborhood. It's all over in unincorporated county, especially. And the density, of course, is increasing. So that led us, these two problems led us to wanting a positive way to address fighting climate change. We wanted to be constructive in our approach and in what we advocated for. And so we did a great deal of research starting in 2017 on the benefits and the qualities that were inherent in tree canopy. We did a great deal of digging into this, looking for other positions by other leagues and in other areas as to what they had looked for in fighting climate change. So what we found were the numerous benefits of trees and tree canopy. First of all, the fertile soil that we enjoy if you have a garden, and during the pandemic, many people turned to gardening, and we were very, very gratified to find that things actually love to grow where we live. And so a lot of that is because of the humus and the way that our trees add nutrients to the soil. We know from our advertising that we have many healthy foods that come from our trees. Apples, Washington is known for, peaches, and now Rainier cherries are abundant in the grocery stores. So enjoy that. We have many healthy foods that come from our trees. We also enjoy the fact that we have all these animals and wildlife and plants that surround us. The trees and its habitat create huge biodiversity for us to enjoy. But the two elements that most impact our decision for following trees as a climate change mitigation was that trees take carbon from the air. They take the carbon dioxide out of the air. They release oxygen, which we need and other life forms need to sustain themselves. It acts as a carbon sink, taking in that carbon, storing the carbon for future generations. So very strong mitigation, especially when we have smoke pollution, smog pollution in our atmospheres. The other one that's lesser known is that trees are natural aqueducts. For every raindrop that falls, 25% of that is going to be captured by the tree leaves and the tree itself. The other part of the tree will capture the stormwater runoff. Those parts of the water that come through in a rain event are stored in the deep well system. They're sent by the tree down to the deep well system of the earth, which acts to cool and clean the water. Stormwater runoff that is not captured goes into the watershed, rivers, lakes, ocean, the recipients of that water, causing a rise in the temperature that affects the flora and the fauna that abide there. Salmon are an example. They cannot stand that rise in temperature that comes from runoff water that has not been properly cooled and cleaned. So that natural aqueduct and the carbon sink qualities of trees are wonderful mitigations for climate change. And one of the reasons we felt encouraged to look at them as a positive resource that we could maintain here in Washington. Moving from the environment, they do a lot for us personally. Breathing clean air, it makes us all feeling invigorated and healthy. And living in an area where there are trees encourages us to get out and walk and run and meet our daily exercise requirements. It promotes people to get together. It promotes healing. I already mentioned the fact that foods from trees tend to be very healthy for us. Mental stress is decreased we learned that during the pandemic, didn't we? Mental stress is decreased by us uniting with that part of nature. Right now, I don't know how many of you saw the article in the Seattle Times on Thursday, but I'd like to encourage you to check that one out. It talked about how the treeless, those parts of the city without trees, were considerably higher in temperature than the areas that had trees. And as a consequence, they were asking people to have cooling stations for persons in those areas. So they're more likely to have cases of heat stroke, heat exhaustion in that particular type of shade. Helps us, and it reduces skin cancer. And one of the things now that we're starting back up into a more active economy, we have the noise from the cars, we have the noise from planes overhead. Trees are a buffer to those kinds of noises. And I'd like to add one thing on here that isn't apparent. Trees are beautiful. They come in so many varieties and so many different types that we are blessed with this beauty that nature has provided. And I feel like that link is so important for people to just feel. And so this personal connection is quite important for all of us. Next slide, Kate, here. Nope. Our past is linked to trees because trees thrive in this climate. We have a place where we have the marine layer that comes in, we have plentiful rain. There are parts of our country that are so arid that you have to petition. I remember sitting next to this gal from Albuquerque who was talking about having to submit a permit to the council, the city, to plant a tree in her yard because of the water that it would take to nurture that tree. We have a place where trees thrive. The American Forest Association recommends 40% of tree canopy for an area to remain healthy. However, some areas, such as ours, can actually hold more than 40%. And that's important to keep in mind because there are some areas of our nation, like Albuquerque, that cannot hold 40%. They're lucky to hold any percentage or 10%. So even though George Vancouver came here and he saw this resource that became a huge commercial economic driver for settling in Washington, you can see the logging industry at work over there. Right now, that resources has diminished to the point where we're looking at our trees and saying, this is what we need to save in order to sustain life, to sustain a healthy life for the people in this area. Those were the reasons we came to want to support a program that would encourage tree canopy, especially in our urban areas, and share it equitably. And in that equitableness, Jet asked, when we think of tree canopy, she says, we think of the rainforest. Our area was, or it should be, and in many places we have on the Olympic Peninsula, our own rainforest, as important, especially here in the Northwest, as what the lungs of the world are considered in the rainforests of Brazil. So preserving our rainforests and the rainforests up the northern part of the continent into Alaska is extremely important for sustaining life on our planet and for mitigating climate change. And we need to think about it in every way we can as we become more, especially as we become more urban. Kate is going to speak to the additional things the elements that went into framing our program of work. So Kate, take it away.
Thanks, Joan. This slide is moving to me because it reflects my legacy. My dad worked in lumber mills around Everett, and he used to boast about walking on log booms floating in the rivers. He could light a wooden match stuck in a tree by throwing a hatchet. That's no lie. And his favorite tree was the Douglas fir. So I am part of the past 150 years where the dominant economic engine of our region relied on cutting trees. The lumberjack evokes a deep heritage for many people in our county, but the dependence on the forest harvest overran the way of life practiced here by the indigenous peoples. It destroyed ecological systems that protected people and a biosphere. The other image shows, if you're on speaker view, you should be able to see Brandon Baugh standing next to a tree. And it is his legacy to catalog significant trees in our county. There is habitat remaining in our county that can be protected if we join our voices to guide our government's plans to manage growth in the very near future. Here's how we got to the tree campaign. Our league has researched tree canopy benefits since 2017 and asked how LWVSC can affect urban tree canopy as a response to the climate crisis in Snohomish County. And it's clear that we need to advocate for policy addressing the whole urban growth area, or the UGA. We need to educate on the impact of urban trees. We need to partner to create political will and to collaborate with others. I'm going to talk a little bit about the advocacy portion of our plan. We got approval from our president for action on urban trees in early 2020, and those actions might include submitting a docket item to the comprehensive plan update to better protect trees in the urban growth area, advocating for new ordinances to replace the landscaping codes now governing tree canopy in the UGA, endorsing and participating in public-led tree boards, and of course, planting and maintaining trees. Then we got approval for a program of work at the May 2021 annual meeting to mount a tree campaign to protect and enhance urban tree canopy in Snohomish County as a response to the climate crisis. Part of the positions we used to get approval for the original action plan in 2020 include the LWV Washington program in action. The climate change position was adopted by, out of the LWVUS impact on issues. It's on page 4 and says support climate goals and policies that are consistent with best available climate science that will ensure a stable climate system for future generations. Land use on page 30 says all known factors should be considered in making land use decisions, and first consideration should be given to the effect on natural elements. The LWVUS impact on issues, as we've said, has the climate change statement from January 2019. It's on page 63. Land use on page 59. The League supports management of land use as a finite resource, not as a commodity, since land ownership, whether public or private, comes with responsibility for stewardship. Land use planning that reflects conservation and wise management of resources, review of environmental, social, and economic impacts of major public and private developments. And the urban policy on page 88 says the League is committed to an urban environment beneficial to life and to resource management in the public interest. We have also relied on the policies in the Puget Sound Regional Council's Vision 2050 adopted in December of 2019 that has new language around climate change. And Vision 2050 has also been endorsed and supported by the League of Women Voters of Washington. And the entire request for approval positions that we relied upon is available in the handout that you can find online. So our advocacy efforts began by drafting a proposed policy to be submitted as a docket item to the Snohomish County Comprehensive Plan update in 2024. The docketing process is a procedure for receiving and evaluating proposals to amend the county's comprehensive plan and development regulations. And the Washington State Growth Management Act requires counties and cities to maintain such a procedure. The comprehensive plan is the document that guides county decisions and services on a wide variety of topics, including land use, transportation, parks, housing, capital facilities, and the natural environment. We looked at the state law that Joan mentioned called the Evergreen Community Act, RCW 35.105, that was passed in 2008 but not funded. There was enough funding to write a guide to community and urban forestry programming in 2009 by the Washington Department of Commerce Evergreen Communities Partnership Task Force to support the ECA. And then the ECA was revised in Washington legislature this year by HB 1216, Urban and Community Forestry. The ECA is now funded, providing technical assistance and funding to jurisdictions. Our goal is to guide our county and city governments to enlist the help of these resources from the Department of Natural Resources to protect and enhance urban forests. And there's a link to this new law, HB 1216, in the handout as well. The guide we used for policy creates a framework for communities to protect and enhance tree canopy. We're working on strategies around these objectives. Provide a healthy urban forest, which will contribute to economic vitality of the community, provide environmental stability and resiliency, and ensure a better quality of life. We want to develop the storytelling that will tie the facts to the effects on people and nature here in Snohomish County and tell these stories to the community and to our government. Manage the community and urban forestry resources for maximum benefit. We might promote analysis of a tool developed by the U.S. Forest Service called the Urban Forestry Sustainability Management Audit. That could be the basis for creating an action plan by our governments. Promote stewardship and enable community education and action. Forterra has brought stewardship training to Snohomish County, and we will promote it and participate in it. Optimize opportunities for partnership in urban forest preservation and enhancement. We're looking for ways to reach students and others interested in this work and support their work. Provide urban forestry resources equitably across the community. We could ask vulnerable communities how they see their natural world and how we can work with their projects. Planning and management of urban forests and trees must consider urban utility infrastructure. We will be lobbying our utilities to plant appropriately along transition lines and other corridors. So our urban tree policy would create a framework within the comprehensive plan, but implementation of worthy goals will take imagination and political will. Our community must create that will through advocacy and education and partnering between now and 2024 and beyond. It's a long haul. We need to maintain the effort through the adoption of the comp plan update in 2024 and beyond to affect implementation of this new policy. And as Dr. Margot Hill said yesterday in her speech, we need to huddle. I'd like to turn it over now to Carol McMahon to tell us a little bit more about our program of work. Carol.
Thank you, Kate. Issues demanding change require advocacy. Legislation and policies require this kind of support. We support those legislation and policies designed to protect tree canopy as a primary climate change mitigation. Advocacy requires action. This took the form of advocating for funding of the Department of Natural Resources Evergreen Community Act update in House Bill 1216, which concerned urban and community forests. It was signed by Governor Inslee on May 10th and will be effective next month, July 25th. And I'd like to include that later in the chat as well, so you'd be able to look at it. It's quite a document, and it reinforces everything we've been telling you so far. Kate described the Docket application, where we drafted a proposed policy. This has been sponsored and presented by Councilperson Megan Dunn to the Snohomish County Council. Further action will require promoting protection of habitat corridors in the urban growth areas. An article by Fast Company dated just this week, 6/22, highlighted a study recently conducted by American Forests. Perhaps you know it. It is the oldest forest conservation organization in America, founded in 1875. It says the data specifically focuses on the effects of trees, the effects of tree presence in a community. We will provide a link to the article and to the American Forest website. It also states its tree equity score tells a little known inequity story that tree presence is strongly correlated to wealth and race. The group isn't just exposing the problem, rather it's a prescription for where exactly cities should plant trees to achieve greater heat equity, and at the same time to improve air quality and create jobs. You'll be able to use the link we provide to the tree equity score to explore information about your neighborhood and your county. As an example, I live in Snohomish County, which indicates 261,286 trees will be needed to get all of the block groups within that community to a score of 75, which seems pretty high, but it's not. You can adjust the score to see the environmental and economic impact of increasing the number of trees. The answer is simple. Restore and maintain our urban growth areas. Plant more trees. That is the ultimate goal of our program of work, to see more trees as the result of our efforts to influence the comprehensive plan. So who knew that Washington State is home to about 5,000 moose? And we celebrated the discovery not too long ago of the return of the wolverines to our forests. These photos represent only some of the wildlife considered when establishing and maintaining wildlife corridors. And wildlife corridors include the culverts used by salmon. You could correctly say that nature acknowledges no boundaries. The protected corridors have been defined by their passage, and we must influence countywide planning policies and the comprehensive plan to establish the necessary rules and regulations and oversight that guide developments affecting so many of our social issues. So we begin with education efforts. The comprehensive plan update will be adopted in 2024 with or without our input. That is a fact. Accomplishing the change we want to see requires public awareness and education. Our efforts to bring awareness to our league chapter and the broader community will expand as part of our focus of work. To accomplish that, we will use media and personal outreach to educate more people about how we can speak out and about urban forests and its benefits. Residents of our county are not always aware that trees can have a deep, immediate effect on their health and well-being. Others are already working on urban forestry. We will promote opportunities to support existing urban tree programs and look to the community for direction on how they would like to see improvements to the natural world in their areas. Our committee presented Climate Change Emergency, Health, and a Million Trees, featuring UW Professor Emeritus Dr. Richard H. Gammon, Dr. John Whitty of Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, and L.B. Jones of Forterra. These experts discussed the risk of climate change and human actions that contribute to this emergency and recommendations for addressing it. We also supported, as did the League of Women Voters, the FutureWise campaign, Washington Can't Wait, updating GMA for today's challenges. The event was held in February this year, and we learned about the purpose of this initiative to fight for action on climate change, environmental justice, and affordable housing by passing the biggest changes to the Growth Management Act in 3 decades during the 2021 legislative session. A key in this effort highlights the importance of adding climate change mitigation to the language of our policies. Our most recent committee meeting, perhaps it was the most important, was just last week and included a guest speaker, Tom Campbell, who served as the Deputy Director of Community Trade and Economic Development, now the Washington State Department of Commerce, designer of Clearwater Commons, and is a member of the Snohomish County Climate Advisory Committee. He noted that more work is needed to close loopholes that disproportionately benefit developers. If something isn't specifically prohibited, enforcement isn't possible. Tom related a conversation with a hearing examiner in which he was told that if a developer has their plan stamped by an engineer, it's not the responsibility of the county to make sure it works. A statistic surprising to many was that all the platted land was bought up in Snohomish County during the recession in 2008 and 2009. Platted land means a tract of parcel or parcel of land which has been subdivided into lots less than 5 acres for the purpose of building developments, including housing developments. We will build on the events we have held so far and bring further programming to the public about urban trees, the GMA, and our efforts to change the comprehensive plan in Snohomish County. We're having discussions now about whether or not to hold a forum this fall. So our planning efforts, this is a big job. We're all affected by it. Good government relies on public participation. Snohomish County has many groups committed to slowing and then reversing climate change in just a few critical years. We can and must join each other to support every good plan that aligns with league positions. We will learn about available programs supporting regulations and incentives and partner with them. We will continue to network with all the environmental groups in the county where we can amplify our voices to county and city governments. There is strength in numbers, and sharing our knowledge will help expand our network. The general public, County Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, Snohomish Conservation District, and the Forterra program, perhaps even you, have suggestions for our strategy. We need to make plans for trees. We need to plan for green spaces, tree-lined streets and sidewalks, preserve what we have and create more. Use the maps to learn about your community. Use the municipal code and planning reports for your city. Know what the comprehensive plan for your county says. Accountability is important. The risk to our climate and our health is too great to ignore. So our public outreach campaign is a key component of any program of work, and especially true when it affects public policy and plans. The purpose is to gain public support, particularly among the affected communities. There are many ways we intend to accomplish this, including the Caucus event tonight. To help communicate the urgency of the climate crisis, our committee conducted the forum as mentioned last October, Climate Change Emergency, and we shared in the Future Wise presentation, also noted. Our Natural Resources Committee meetings, led by Joan, are open and accessible via Zoom. We regularly invite speakers to help us understand the issues at hand, advance knowledge about the environment, and determine actions we may take as a committee and as individuals. We promote carbon offset activity on our chapter website under Committees, Natural Resources Committee. This is a lengthy link we'll include to that document, but it's kind of fun. We use field trips within our communities to learn about what is going on, such as the Clearwater Commons and Country Charm Conservation Area and others. We'll have the Country Charm Conservation Area field trip this summer. Our committee members are encouraged to look for opportunities to engage by volunteering. Examples are stewardship board positions and our planting and maintaining parks. Forterra recently kicked off their forest steward orientation, part of their Healthy Forest Project. They too are growing their network in Pierce, King, and Snohomish counties with Green City partnerships. And in 2021-22, our committee has established Evergreen Community Actor Awards and developed a natural resources brochure outlining our program of work. Partnering opportunities in the community. Again, good government in our democracy relies on public participation. Snohomish County has many groups committed to slowing and reversing climate change in just a few critical years, as mentioned. So we can and must join each other to support every good plan that aligns with league positions. You'll learn about available programs, supporting regulations and incentives, and partner with them. We will continue to network with the environmental groups in the county wherever we can to amplify our voices. The Green City Partnerships mentioned in the previous slide is one of those partnerships to grow. Forterra has partnered with the city of Everett, but we and they have a long way to go to include other municipalities in our county. Every county in the state has a conservation district. Each is a tremendous resource for partnering, and Snohomish Conservation District is no exception. So now, on behalf of Joan and Kate and Vicki and Margie, I want to thank you for your patience and the opportunity to present to you this evening. We invite you and your suggestion to provide suggestions to add to our strategy. If you have any questions you'd like to add, put them in the chat, or I believe you'd be able to raise your hand in your reactions to be acknowledged for the conversation. Now's a good time to switch over to gallery view, and we will go to Q&A. Oh, one more thing. If you didn't get a chance to put your questions in the chat, like I said, use the reaction button. I think there's about 17 of us. We could probably handle the questions by raised hands.
Okay, are we ready to start questions, or do we have more info first?
I think we are ready to go to Q&A.
Well, Jen Winkler got us started off with a question in the chat, and it's multi-layered question. First of all, she referred to the tree canopy and how that fit in with the rainforest. She said she thinks about rainforest when she thinks about tree canopy. That Joan addressed that briefly, but then she has more questions. She says, what does the tree canopy refer to? Is it leaves, number of leaves? Is it number of trees per acre? Is there a difference between summer when all the leaves are out and winter when they're not? Some really good questions. So I'm going to leave it to you to answer that, Kate and Joan.
Well, all of that. They are, the tree canopy is that segment that comes with the way that the branches of the trees cover the earth. And in the winter, there's far less tree canopy from deciduous trees. And that's where the evergreen trees that grow so well here in the Northwest remain so important, because a lot of what is replanted when the evergreen trees are taken out are the deciduous trees, which do not have the constant tree canopy of the evergreens. So tree canopy is a significant element to count and to think about. We have a couple of tools that are allowing us to view that better. And the American Forest and what was it, Carol? We have some links to those where you can actually examine tree canopy for a particular area. And we're getting better at it. That's why in our work, we're just making discoveries too. Mapping has become a major element in trying to understand better how to target our efforts. Mapping for tree canopy in the urban area, trying to make it equitable, trying to connect corridors of tree canopy so that the habitat, the animals have those wildlife corridors that allow them to get to their mating areas and then to their winter hibernation areas. All of that is made possible when we can actually see it but it has to it takes some design, it takes some thinking about, and the maps provide that concrete visual that we've needed. So tree canopy is very important, and you're right, Jen, it's not always the same, especially winter to summer.
So
Vicki. I'm sorry, did we answer this multi-level question from Jen? I would just throw in there before we move off of that, that the tree canopy that is proposed for our urban growth area depends on the kind of development. For large developments, they are required to reach 30% tree canopy on the big property within 20 years. It has to be a certain list of trees, native trees, doesn't have to be evergreens, as long as they will get to 30% within 30 years. The problem is that the big developments generally will just scrape the land. They take all the topsoil and they plant trees or they plan for trees that will reach the canopy at 30% tree canopy within 20 years. But then there's no follow-up to whether the trees actually were planted, whether the people who bought the property decided they didn't like the trees and cut them down, or whether they just are allowed to die. And the fact that the soil is barren to begin with will make the trees struggle for many years to come. And none of that is handled by the tree canopy ordinance, which lives in the landscaping code of our county. And then when you get to bigger property or more dense property, and we are very much in favor of dense residential property built near transit. But the multifamily, the townhomes have to reach 20% tree canopy, and the multifamily developments need to reach 15% tree canopy. So we obviously have a challenge to buy, obtain, acquire, get partnership with property owners to compensate for where there will not be 40%, 30%. It should be 40% tree canopy as the development continues to just scour the unincorporated urban growth area. We are expecting 420,000 more people to come to this county between now and 2050, and they all want to live somewhere. So that is the challenge, and we can do a lot better than we're doing now. Vicki.
Yes, I had a question for myself, but in the meantime, there's one in the chat. I was going to ask if there were rules about how much you're supposed to replace when you scrape the ground, and you answered that. Thank you. But the next question from Devin was, how is climate change affecting what trees are going to thrive here? And is work being done to determine which trees we should be planting for longevity?
Do you want to talk about that, Joan? I'm not an expert. I can guess. Clearly, climate change is going to change what trees do thrive here. There are requirements in the code to plant native trees, but they are not always the best selection for.
I know that people tend to move away from the big trees because they are afraid. And cedars, Douglas firs are giants. And when they're left singular, they do best when they're planted in groves, or if they're kept together in groups. So if you have green belts, which have multitudes of these larger trees, they will thrive. They'll continue to communicate with each other and reinforce each other. But very often what they've done is they've leave a singular tree, and a singular tree does not stand up well against the ravages of the storms. And with the loss of trees, wind increases, the rainfall events and things like that will become more intense, more extreme. And so very often what is encouraged, and they're for example, they'll put in a vine maple, which is a much smaller tree and a deciduous tree, rather than putting in an evergreen. It's also a native tree. The Pacific 9-bark is also a native tree. Again, deciduous, a much smaller variety. And people, feel more comfortable having that size of tree around their home. However, it doesn't provide us with the same degree of canopy that we're losing. And so to come up with a factor that will compensate is part of the work that we're doing, is to come up with ways to suggest, let's put in a green belt here where there can be a multitude of bigger trees, and set it off from the actual building of the homes so that it can not act as a fear-provoking spot. Does that help? I don't know. Who asked
Rosalind.
that question? So.
We have a question from Rosalind with her hand up, and then after that, I'll share a question from Jean in the chat.
So I think this is wonderful work you're doing, and it's very exciting to hear all the different dimensions of it. I have a couple of things that we've taken part of here in Seattle, King County. One is my husband and I are tree ambassadors, and one of the things tree ambassadors do would fit very well in your education piece. We learn about the different types of trees, how to identify them, and we will go through and map out a neighborhood and identify all the trees in that neighborhood. And we do it, the goal is to make it about an hour-long walk, so it's just a few blocks, and you take pictures of the trees and identify and tell a little bit about them. And so what you're doing is getting people to appreciate what wonderful trees we have and learn about them. And then in the course of that, we bring in information about, how the birds are affected, how health is affected, how the water is preserved. We've even had some people come along and do translation. So people who speak, it was a Spanish translator, came on one of our tree walks. But the tree walks, once you lead them, or we did before the COVID things, but you put together a tree walk, you lead a small group to inaugurate it, and one of the people from the group comes along to make sure you've got your tree names right. And then it goes up on the website, and anybody can download that tree walk and just go on it anytime on your phone. And
that's a wonderful idea.
Wonderful. It's really a very great. It's fun, and it's a great way to educate people about our trees. The other thing, you're talking about allies, and the Arbor Day Foundation is a fantastic organization if you have worked with them. And the in Seattle, King County, I don't know if you've heard of the work being done by our climate committee. They've come up with a I think it's called Climate Ambassadors Toolkit. And the purpose is to we have people now embedded in all of the local governments who are league members, who sit in and help them implement the environmental and climate laws that have been passed. So help them come up with ways to do it that are equitable and that give them some guidance, but also act as watchdogs that they're doing it. So that might be another good resources to talk. Her name's Mac, M-A-K, who runs that committee, and they've been just mind-bogglingly dynamic about what they're doing. So just throwing out some more things.
Thank you.
That sort of ally with what you're already doing.
Excellent.
Okay, Jean had some question in the chat. Jean, would you like to ask it for yourself?
Yes, thank you, Margie. I'm wondering about the sustainability of all of this work that you're doing on the tree canopy. And I wanted to ask, so do these standards have to be maintained in perpetuity throughout time? And then also, what happens if there is some kind of natural predator that will attack trees? I spent some time in Colorado, and you can see entire hillsides covered with brown pine trees from the pine borer beetle.
Well, the pine borer beetle, I understand from I talked to a forest ranger, a U.S. ranger, park ranger actually in Yosemite about that. And it is naturally occurring, and they tend to not do anything about it unless it is affecting some bigwig's property, I think. I'm sure it's exacerbated. The trees are under pressure and are more vulnerable to that kind of thing, I think. But their attitude was basically, you let it run its course, and that we may see more and more of that. But as far as by the sustainability of the program, do you mean? I guess I would say that obviously growth is going to affect where trees will remain and where they'll be planted, and it will be a constant balancing between the immense growth that's going on will continue to grow on, and we really need to start planning with the entire watershed in mind, and stop just making the value of the home and the taxpayer the only calculation involved in who builds where and how big. I mean, should maybe the lot size on a particular plan, if you want to build 4 houses on 5 acres, you need to build smaller and allow more, even if it affects the bottom line. And that's the kind of discussion that we'll need to have with all the stakeholders, and it's not going to be an easy discussion.
Jean, I'd like to add on to that. I think what we're doing here is trying to inspire people to see the benefit of trees. And I think the more that the public takes on the idea that this is an important part for their, an important element for their quality of life, there'll be more volunteers, and there'll be more people pushing to maintain those trees and to value the trees that are around them. And that's what we're trying to inspire, so that there will be this ongoing feeling that keeps people engaged with what we consider to be a highly important part of sustainability and mitigation for climate change. It's something that's part and parcel of what we need to be doing. This is an emergency. This is something we can do. We can do this, and there's a whole idea that we can manage this. It's really an important part of the whole program, and encouraging everyone to feel that this is take ownership is what we're trying to do.
Thanks.
I noticed that there was another question in there. Is that a comment or a question, Rosalind? Rosalind, you were commenting about, you're on mute, so you need to unmute. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was just reinforcing the comment someone said about what kind of trees. And the law, you said right now reads that they have to be native trees, but with our climate changing, native trees might not be the best trees. And I know in Seattle, some of the newer trees we're planting are ones that can handle more air pollution, and they aren't native trees. And also we're trying to avoid planting so many of the same kind of trees. Right now, the birch trees are in danger. And if you plant a lot of the same tree, then you endanger a larger part of your canopy. So that might be a question to ask the lawmakers. Is our native trees should that read native trees in the law?
Mm.
Yeah, I think the ordinances are a little more flexible, but they do try to substitute native trees wherever possible. The other part that Jean spoke to, and I heard one of our, was it Kevin that we talked to, a forester works with the Master Gardeners Association. He said his nightmare is a coronavirus of trees, something that will come in and just wipe out the Douglas firs or wipe out, and we actually have had that. We've had the hemlocks that used to be the principal tree of the forest have declined, have gone into decline. We had a pine infestation that it just took out all the white pines. And I thought it was interesting in going through the green belts and some of the areas, I found a white pine, and the person I was with said, "Oh, save that tree, take a picture. We really want to know the white pines that have survived, because the survivors have something about them genetically that we can encourage and replant so that it fights the disease that's taking it out." So there are people that are studying these things, Jean. I don't happen to be one of them at this point in my life, but they do try to find the trees that actually can combat the diseases that are out there, but they're very unclear about what disease can come in and wipe out a whole species. Margie.
I see that we're running out of time, and I wanted to point out a comment from Devin. She asks, what about linking up with schools, either through class activities or through school newsletters about events? I don't know if we have time to respond to that. There's quite a few interesting things in the chat, ideas, readings, and of course the links that Carol and others have put in, which I'm sure
you can
access.
save your chat. If you save your chat, you can actually do that. I think you just open the chat up and look for the little 3 dots and save chat. But I would say, Devin, that we don't have any programs right now, but the LWVSC has had a lot of success in initiating voter registration activities in schools in Snohomish County, and I think that we will try to piggyback on some of that, of those kind of connections and contacts. And we have a lot of teachers, and those teachers have contacts, and we'll be looking to them to help us contact and get inroads to students. I don't think we can do it without the young people, is all I can say. But thanks everybody for coming today.
Yes, I'd like to thank, and I thank you both, Vicki and Margie, for acting. They were in our background, but they were helping us with the questions and things of that nature. And we really appreciate your coming and sharing this time with us and giving us ideas. Truly important for us to expand our vision of going forward. And so we hope you take these ideas, the things that have been going on, back to your own community and share it and go forward and save and plan for trees in your urban areas and throughout. So, and just enjoy them.
Good night, everybody.